Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing a wrap-up of the readathons that I participated in this November. I participated in both Nonfiction November as well as Lovember, which are excellent readathons. I had such a fun time with these. So I want to tell you about what I read for them because they were great books. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. So first, let me talk about what I read for Nonfiction November, which is a readathon hosted by Olive at abookolive. I'll have information about the readathon linked below in case you're interested. And I had such a fun time reading for this challenge. I really love nonfiction, and this month I read some great nonfiction. So the readathon has 4 challenge kind of prompt words. So I'll go through those and talk about what I read for them. So for the collection prompt, I read The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, which is a collection of essays or reviews of different things about the human world. I actually loved this book and I have a standalone review for it, so I will link that below if you want more details. But basically, these are just really moving essays talking about the impact of humanity on the world around us, the things that we interact with in daily life, and John Green's own personal experiences with them. A lot of these essays are very vulnerable, where he talks about things like anxiety and depression and health issues that he's gone through, but also just reflections on the unfairness of life and capitalism and kind of climate change and all of these sorts of things, but all tied to some specific things. So like Canada geese or I think Diet Dr. Pepper, these sorts of things. So I just really loved these essays. They're short and they're moving, and I had such a fun time with this. For the industry prompt, I read Feathers by Thor Hansen, which is a book all about feathers. It is a combination of sort of nature writing and science, as well as talking about the feather industry. So talking about how feathers are used in things like blankets and pillows and jackets, and what the thermal properties of feathers are, and how birds themselves keep hot or cold, and why we use that in puffy jackets, that sort of thing. Talks about the history of how feathers evolved, but also talks about how humans use feathers. So how humans use feathers, especially in fashion. So he talks about feathers being used in Las Vegas showgirls outfits, as well as the big craze for feathers that happened for hats, and how that affected kind of the murder of many birds for really a century of women's hats, and just the impact that that has had on birds. So this book is just everything you ever wanted to know about feathers, and talks about kind of the effect that the feather industry has had on birds. Really good read. For the treatment prompt, I read Crying in H-Mart by Michelle Zauner. And I chose this for treatment because this really focuses on cancer treatment. Michelle Zauner's mother got cancer and ended up passing away from it. And this is her memoir about kind of her interactions with her mother, and her mother going through cancer, and her losing her to cancer. And so it is definitely about grief. It's about how that cancer was treated, how really Michelle was affected by all of those things. And it's also just about her relationship with her mother and her connection to food, and to her Korean heritage and all of these sorts of things. It is a very emotional book, a lot of vulnerability in here, and some of the essays are just really stand out. For the style prompt, I read 2 books about art. So the first was Women in Art by Rachel Ignatowski. This is sort of a middle grade read, but I loved it as an adult. It is a collection of 50 mini bios of women throughout history who were artists and sort of their impact on the field. Rachel Ignatowski has a whole series of books about women in different fields, and the illustrations are just amazing. Really unique, fantastic illustrations, and lots of great bios about all sorts of women, some that I've heard of before, but many of whom I hadn't, across all different fields of art: photography and sculpture and painting and architecture. Really loved this. Very just heartwarming and inspirational, reading about all of these different women creating all of these different types of art. The other book about art that I read was The Scurlock Studio in Black Washington, Picturing the Promise by the National Museum of African American History and Culture. So this is a photo book with a lot of essays, especially by historians, kind of the catalog of a bunch of different photos that the Scurlock Studio, which was a Black family-owned photography studio in Washington, D.C. in the 20th century took. So a lot of these focus on the first half of the 20th century, and really the way that the Scurlock family took portraits of a bunch of different figures in kind of the Black middle class and kind of political sphere. Lots of really gorgeous photos, as well as photos of just life around them. So they especially like to highlight Black businesses, and they were the official photographers of Howard University. So many interesting photos, but also really great essays. A lot of historians just talking about what was going on at the time and why the Scurlocks were photographing the things that they were, and sort of giving context. A lot of nuanced discussion as well about kind of different politics relating to race and how different Black people in the community viewed that, especially how these photographs were situated, a little bit of the sort of respectability politics, the talented 10th, that idea of trying to capture images of the Black middle class and all of the wonderful things they were doing. Well, maybe there were other things going on in DC as well, but why that was so important. And I just loved the essays as well as the photographs. A little bit academic at times, but just such a good collection. Then moving on to the books that I read for Lovember, which is run by Becca at Read Becca, who I will link all of the information below for. And this is just a readathon to read romances in November, and I was on board. I had such a fun time reading for this. There is sort of a collection of different tiers of challenges, and Becca has made a bunch of really interesting kind of challenges you can do within the tiers. So check out the readathon info for more on that. I just tried to hit at least every prompt that there was. So the first romance I read was Alpaca and Apparitions by Andy C. Buchanan. This is such a sweet novella that is a contemporary witchy fiction story set in New Zealand about a fiber witch who has magic and that is involved in her weaving and the textiles that she makes, who decides to go and stay in a cabin kind of on a farm to work on some new projects, and she happens to kind of fall in love with the woman next door who is a farmer who has alpaca. And there is a magical mystery going on that they have to work together to solve. This is such a sweet novella. It is part of Buchanan's Windflower series. So I have a review for the first part of that series, and I'll link that below if you're interested, but just such a sweet, heartwarming, gentle story that has a really neat mystery as well. This satisfies the prompts of contemporary, science fiction and fantasy, and animal on the cover. Then I read The Craft of Love by E.E. Ottoman, which is another novella, but this is a historical romance set in the 1830s in New York. It is just such a gentle and sweet story again. So this follows a silversmith who is a trans man that is recovering from some illness and also trying to work through some issues that he had with his mother when he finds some old dresses that his mother had made and decides to get them made into a quilt as part of that kind of healing process. So he hires a quilt maker, and as a return for her making the quilt, he makes her a silver teapot, and they just form a friendship filled with respect for each other. It's just such a gentle, sweet romance. It made my heart flutter when, you know, their hands touched. It was just so gentle and adorable. And it also just is filled with a lot of really interesting politics of the day, talking about kind of unionizing and workers' rights and the way that women craftspeople were treated and all of these sorts of things. So I loved this, definitely recommend it. And it satisfied the prompts of historical and new to me author. Then I read How to Fail at Flirting by Denise Williams. This is a contemporary romance that is about a professor who is trying to get over a past relationship that was really emotionally abusive and very traumatic for her. She's really trying to open herself up again and rediscover her kind of boldness and joy in life. And so her friends suggest she goes and has, you know, a fling, that she flirts with a guy. And so she tries it. And of course, there's a little bit more to it than that. and the guy is also trying to work through some different issues that he's had in the past. And so this story really focuses on them both kind of learning how to trust each other and be vulnerable, as well as work through some of those old things. And this does, by the way, involve her ex coming back and her having to deal with that. So if you don't like stories that involve kind of an abusive past relationship, you might want to be careful about this one, but it was just so well written, and I loved the characters, I loved the romance, and it was just such a great book. This satisfied the prompts of contemporary and new to me author. And lastly, I read Tempest by Beverly Jenkins. This is the third book in her Old West historical romance series. So this book follows Reagan, who comes from a pretty well-off, rich Black family in Arizona territory, but she is somebody who loves adventure. She loves doing new things and going new places and trying stuff. And she decides that she's going to become a mail order bride to a doctor, a Black doctor in Wyoming territory, who has a young daughter who is 6 years old, but his wife had passed away years before, and he just needs somebody to help him raise his daughter. And she thinks this is a grand adventure, so she goes to become a mail order bride, but of course it's a little bit more complicated than just showing up. She has to work with him to kind of figure out how they're going to interact, especially because she is so independent and so strong and so talented and just really a cool person. She also has to integrate into the town, and this is a town with like lots of Black residents, but also lots of white residents, and just kind of finding her place and connecting to the different women, joining in on the politics, advocating for different changes such as, you know, funding their local school, lots of really cool things. Oh, and if I hadn't mentioned, this takes place in the, I think, 1880s. So yeah, this is filled with such cool historical stuff. Also talks about a lot of the issues related to the Chinese railroad workers and sort of the very bad things that were done to them, and just many of the race issues that were happening in kind of the Old West. I love Beverly Jenkins' kind of historical romances. She does such an amazing job of pulling in such interesting history and politics and everything like that. I wasn't as much of a fan of the romantic hero lead, the doctor. He was a little bit full of himself, but Reagan was a great character and I loved the history, so I had a fun time with this one. Okay, so that is everything that I read for Nonfiction November and Lovember. If you guys have read any of these, or if you participated in these readathons and read other things and you want to tell me about what you read, or if you guys have read other nonfiction or romance books that, based on what I've talked about, you think I would like, I'd love to hear from you. Just leave me a comment down below.